Good afternoon and welcome to our City Council work session of September 28th. I think this evening I would like to have our city manager come up and give a brief overview of the items that we're going to be looking at this afternoon. Winter, Brenda, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. If I'm out of breath, I had to run back upstairs to grab my book, so I apologize. Quickly this evening, we have a couple opportunities for you to engage with city staff about what I call strategic planning. Jenny Jones will introduce some consultants that are here for this evening, and then Tim, our utilities director, and Reed will talk about some water infrastructure. So exciting things. And then the business siding briefings, we have two right-of-way vacations that are going to be positioned for the 12th of October. So to get you briefed on those, and then Reed Lanham is here, and he'll engage you about the quarterly payments, the quarterly adjustments, excuse me. But the one introduction, Mayor, I'd like to make at this time is we have since hired a new Human Resources Director, Michelle Jackson. Michelle Jackson's with us this evening. I'd love to say. And with that, Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll start off with Parks and Recreation Needs Assessment and Comprehensive Park Master Plan presentation. Jenny Jones.
Good afternoon, Mayor Dolan, Vice Mayor Wright, members of City Council. It's been 24 years since the city last updated the Parks and Recreation Needs Assessment and Comprehensive Park Master Plan. City Council approved funding for this study in the fiscal year 2021 capital improvement budget. The Needs Assessment and Comprehensive Park Master Plan kicked off March 1 of 2021. After 7 consultant companies submitted proposals for the project, a team of city directors vetted and chose Lowe's Design out of Nashville, Tennessee to conduct the process and develop the plan. Lowe's stood out from the competition, having served over 1,000 communities on parks and recreation projects since 1982. Lowe's created over 100 comprehensive park and recreation master plans. Overall, the Lowe's Design team's involvement in NRPA and their national park planning experience provided them a broad perspective, gathering the best ideas from many areas of the country. Today, the Lowe's Design team is represented by Will Hager, Associate Vice President of Planning, and his expertise is in park planning. Representing the Barry Dunn consulting firm is Barbara Heller, a nationally renowned expert in the field of recreation. Together, they'll present the initial findings of the community engagement portion of the Lynchburg Parks and Recreation Department's needs assessment. This report will also include initial findings regarding benchmarking, level of service, park service gap analysis, connectivity analysis, recreation programming, cost recovery, health equity, and a financial analysis. Again, these are initial findings. The consultants will use City Council's feedback from this report to assist in directing the final comprehensive park master plan to be presented to City Council later this winter. And with that, Will Hager is going to kick things off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, members of the council. We're really excited to be here tonight to uncover some of our initial findings and give you an overview of what we've done so far. As Jenny said, our team includes Barry Dunn and Barbara and her staff. They're going to focus on operational aspects, and that allows us to focus on the public input and physical improvements and capital improvements for your inventory. We tried to go about these projects in a comprehensive way that really relies on public input, but also considers national standards from other similar jurisdictions as Lynchburg. So when you look over this purpose and scope, just understand that we make a concerted effort to hear from your constituents first, and then we're looking for other opportunities based on national standards, and that'll be realized in the coming slides. And initially, we wanted to really understand who's living in Lynchburg now, what does that mean in terms of age groups to serve, and what their interests might be. We also want to understand your growth rates. So when you look at these findings from your demographics, we see steady growth through the year 2040 that you can reliably count on. You're a youthful community, and I think that's tied to the number of universities present in the community. And then you have the possibility for some economic barriers to recreation, just based on our review of economic statistics at the household level. There's a relatively high number of households that are in poverty, and the median household income level is somewhat low when compared to state and national numbers. All that means is that we may need to find opportunities to increase access for households in that condition, and that might impact what you can do in terms of fees and those types of things. We also want to look at public health, and when we reviewed that, it appears that obesity and physical inactivity are relatively high here in Lynchburg when compared to Virginia and other parts of the country. So we rolled out a very intense public input campaign. We had a project website that received thousands of hits and hundreds of responses. So we were really pleased with that. It was something that was very important to Jenny and her staff, and we had really good input with their help. So what we found overall is that trails are incredibly important to the people that offered their input. The river is also obviously a significant feature here, and many people are interested in pursuing ways to engage with the river in a more meaningful way. And then we rolled out a series of pop-up events. Some of you may have participated in that. We tried to take these questions to different parts of the community. We did several in our trip here this spring, and then Jenny's staff facilitated several more over the next month. And what we found is that in terms of priorities for the community, program priorities include special events-based things, so concerts, movies in the park, and then specific classes, gardening, arts, things of that nature. Probably not a surprise to people that live here and understand how important arts are to this community, but it was really interesting to see. And then in terms of facilities, there was a strong interest for expanding farmers markets, bringing those markets to different parts of the community, and expanding the existing walking and biking trails throughout the neighborhood. And we also received some very specific comments on the project website to help us understand what people meant by that. But overall, outdoor recreation and passive recreation scored really high when we looked at these comments from the public. Then we had several focus groups that covered topics from sustainability to partner groups and the like. And then we had one specifically for big ideas. We wanted to see what ideas have support in the community, and these would be something that would separate Lynchburg from some of your peers. They would really put you on the map in terms of a destination for specific types of recreation. And those included expanding the farmers market again, which has some support, a new senior center, some indoor facilities made this list for sure, because we saw some deficits there. So a new senior center is included in that. Also a recreation community center that might include a pool and indoor gymnasium space, which is definitely needed when looking at your current inventory. We're also on this list. We also have several other items that have been discussed previously in previous planning efforts and studies. The 10-minute walk idea was identified by the Trust for Public Land a couple years ago, and that's still something that seems to have a good base of support here in the community. And then Heritage Park development, Foundry Park implementation, some very specific property-based ideas as well. The most interesting one that we became aware of was the Whitewater Park and canoe kayak blueways, which I know has been discussed and studied somewhat. It's also a trend that we're seeing increase in this part of the country. They've been strong out west for a number of years, but now the Appalachians and eastern part of the U.S. are really taking on with that too. And you've got a great opportunity for that here. So part of our project website asked people, what do you want and where do you want it? So I hope each of you got a chance to participate, but you could actually drag and drop a point or a comment on a map and tell us what you would like to see there. So we had good distribution across the community. We got really good input from all geographic segments of Lynchburg, and they gave us some really good input. But by far, the most popular comments that were received were based on trails and Greenway expansion, but we also had a lot of people requesting new parks in parts of the city that they felt were underserved. The interesting thing about this is that this really aligns with our own study and the Trust for Public Lands previous study, and we'll look at that in a moment. So we also wanted to take a step back and look at national trends in terms of the types of park facilities and what a community your size typically has. It doesn't mean that you have to have it. We obviously want to make decisions based on what the public wants, but we wanted to get a second perspective to see how that complements each other. So the table in front of you highlights a few areas that are deficient, such as playgrounds, youth baseball, youth soccer. What's interesting is that with the exception of playgrounds, we heard a number of comments about the need for additional playgrounds, special types of playgrounds for those with special needs, and that sort of thing. We did not see a huge outpouring from the youth sports leagues or groups like that, which is surprising considering the overall age of the community and kind of the youthful trend that we're seeing there. We did the same thing for indoor facilities, and you'll see the first two lines are recreation center and community center. So those could be those indoor facilities that provide gym space for basketball, volleyball, an aquatic center for a swim team, swimming lessons, aquatic therapy classes, and things like that. We also had opportunities for a performance theater and a nature center. You're doing a lot in the Miller Center now. But these would be above and beyond what you're able to provide there and give them a formal space to have those programs and activities. And here's our gap analysis. I alluded to this a little while ago. What we did is map your population density to try to figure out where most households are located in the city. And then we overlay that with your park locations and then assign service areas to those to see who has good access to these parks. And what you'll notice is southwest Lynchburg, there's a dark shaded area that represents a fairly high level of population, but not a ton of parks in that area, which, and there's a few more instances like that, the Rivermont area, the Tyriana area, and some others that help us identify areas that could use additional parks and different types of parks to serve those communities and those families. The interesting thing, like I said before, is that it really aligns with what the Trust for Public Land found a couple of years ago. And then we also are performing a connectivity analysis based on the public comment. As I mentioned, trails are incredibly important to the community here, and it really sets you apart because of the quality of trails that you have and the context that those trails are in. So we got some really great feedback from the public on where those connections could happen, where they should happen. And there's a lot of interest in using these trails, not just for recreation, but more of a transportation alternative. So that has a lot of benefits for you, not just in terms of your recreation system, but just overall quality of life. Now I'm going to hand it over to Barbara so she can fill you in on some of the operational aspects.
And are you advancing on there?
You can just scroll. You want me to do it for you?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've actually had the pleasure of working with Winter before. In fact, the reason he decided to come here to be city manager was he knew I was engaged in this project, and he was dying to see me again. So real pleasure to be here. And we work a lot with Lowe's. I work for a firm called Barry Dunn, and we have about 200 local government consultants, and I head up the Park and Recreation group. So similarly to Jenny and her staff, I came from that world of working for city and county governments, as well as special districts. Will and I have very complementary skill sets, whereas he concentrates and focuses on the physical assets. We pay attention to the operations, the recreation programming, the financial type of information. So I'll just kind of give a quick overview of the 4 different areas that we were engaged in. And these are initial findings. You might sit there and think, okay, well, based on this information, what do we do? That would be the next step. We've finished a couple of the reports, handed them off to staff. It's their they'll be reviewing those, and then we'll have a meeting to see what questions are or comments they have, and then we'll come up with recommendations. So the first thing we wanted to just mention, I always like to get a sense of the overall department and the community, and really striking from the public input, just the natural resources, the beauty, the natural resources that you have to work with is a tremendous strength. The staff here obviously have been working really hard. When you look at that database growing from 5,300 to 26,000 unique users, that says an awful lot about program growth. I know when I met with staff, they said initially their programming wasn't necessarily a strength, but it certainly has turned into a strength now. And then just commitment to health and wellness. Every community that we go to these days has an interest and commitment to it. Lynchburg was ahead of the curve and really has established that as an important service for the community. One of the top 5 award winners from VRPS, 9% improvement in the National Citizen Survey. And then just when we compare staffing, fewer staff and less funding than what we see in a typical park and recreation agency. So from a recreation programming perspective, what we like to do is just identify an inventory of programs. What type of programs are there? Are we reaching all markets that we need to? And then we align this with all of the work that Will did on the community engagement piece of what's missing. And then we also utilize trend information of what we're seeing around the country. For example, nature programming is become more and more popular, so that's an area of growth for the department. So it's just a distribution showing all of the different programs and activities. And I will say, typically in many, many communities, it's really skewed very heavily towards sports. It's really nice to see a community where there's an appreciation for arts and enrichment and all different types of programs, and a nice percentage dedicated towards senior services, which is good to see as well. And then similarly to what Will did, we take a look at the NRPA. It's called Park Metrics. 1,000 agencies from around the country will enter their database of statistics, data, facilities, staffing, and we come up with some comparisons. And in the first section, it's just about what % of budget is dedicated, and you'll see that on the park side, Lynchburg's a little bit lower than the others, and that has to do with this department doesn't have all of park maintenance. Public Works takes care of it, whereas typically that's all within the Park and Recreation Department. And we took a look at non-tax revenue. That's important. How is that doing? And we're a little bit lower on that. The lower quartile represents the bottom 25%. The upper quartile, the upper 75%, and the median is at the 50th. Then we looked at a total number of full-time equivalent employees, so again, near the lower quartile. And then when you look at the total number of programs offered, you can see in terms of productivity, they're doing great, and the same with volunteers. Lots of volunteer hours to help augment services. So we took a look at health equity. That was one of the requirements, and we did some information gathering. I facilitated a focus group with folks that were interested in health and wellness, and it was one of my favorite focus groups that I've done. It was via Zoom, but people that were very, very passionate and interested. So I think there's lots of opportunity here, but did a lot of information gathering, talked to staff, doing some best practice research from around the country, and then we'll be doing some analysis. So just some things, next slide, just some things, just creating a community feedback strategy, doing it an ongoing way to find out from the public what they want, working on enhancing accessibility to parks, to exercise, and then just really focusing resources on what are the best opportunities. A holistic framework, so taking a look at park, facilities, programs, and just making sure that we're really covering physical, mental, social, financial, and all different types of purposes. Lots of opportunities for partnerships, to support racial equity, and then just continuously improving access to produce and other local whole foods. That's something we're seeing everywhere, but you guys certainly got a head start from other communities. And then the last piece that I'll review is just some financial preliminary findings. We'd like to take a look at what's happening in terms of tax revenue, non-tax revenue, fees and charges, costs, indirect and direct costs. So we took a look at permits and services, revenue and expense, personnel, which is usually a real significant piece to expenses, non-personnel, and then indirect cost analysis. So those were all the areas we took a look at. And then just a summary of financial preliminary findings. So this chart represents those activities and programs and services that have a fee associated with them, and it has a cost recovery rate of 108%. So that's really a healthy amount. And then the last slide we have is just taking a look at the overall budget. And what this shows are all the different service programs and service categories, what current revenue is, current expense, and current cost recovery. And we've included a cost modeling spreadsheet for staff to be able to develop some really sophisticated ways at looking at how do we want to do, what types of results do we want in terms of cost recovery. But overall, the department is recovering 16.5% of its costs. So that's it in a nutshell for me, and I'll turn it back over to Will.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so as Barbara mentioned, we're drafting sections of the report now, and we'll be vetting those through Jenny and her team. So we're hopefully keeping on track to have this in front of you by the end of the year. But are there any questions with what we presented so far?
Giraldi?
Will and Barbara, I want to thank you for the work you put into this so far, and Jenny and your team, wherever you ran off to. And I do have some questions for you, if that's okay. On slide number 5, I believe it was, you cited the obesity and physical inactivity as relatively high. What is relatively high for a city our size? As I'm a numbers, I try to be a numbers guy.
Yeah, so there are a few sources that compare communities to other jurisdictions, and the way we typically approach it is that we'll grab Lynchburg, compare it to the state of Virginia, and then national top performers to kind of see how it falls out. So I can't remember the numbers right off, but I believe Lynchburg was maybe 32% obesity rate, where Virginia was slightly lower than that, just a point or two. So it's just something to be aware of, despite the fact that you've got really good access to a lot of different types of recreation facilities. There's something that is keeping that obesity rate and physical inactivity rate higher than we would want it to be. A lot of this is cultural. We work all across the country, but we do a lot of work in the South. And we typically see higher obesity rates in the Southeast specifically. So I think there's some cultural ties there. But if we can find ways to provide the opportunities that people are interested in a way that is accessible to them, then hopefully we can see increased rates of activity and lower obesity over time.
Thank you. On slide number 7, you referenced Whitewater, and I do recall conversations occurring at least a couple of years ago, maybe with Amherst County. Did that drive any of your conversations on this piece, or was this aggregated from your public feedback specifically?
Well, we heard it first through the public feedback, and then in discussions with Jenny and the data that her team provided us, we realized that, hey, this is a real opportunity that's been studied before. And that's something on the scale. It's like a lot of things. You can finish them on a multitude of levels. You can spend a modest amount and really have a nice facility, or you can really knock it out and try to attract these regional tourism dollars to your community. But you've got a great opportunity here, and I believe other communities in the same region are looking for those opportunities as well. So definitely something we would ask you to consider. And if you have any thoughts along those lines, we would love to hear those.
I'm certainly interested in that. I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I will say the previous construction of Lynchburg from way back when does make it a little bit difficult with the railroad cutting us off from the river, so that might make it a little bit challenging. But I'm really interested in seeing where that might go. On slide number 10, just a general comment that I thought of. I do a little bit of Little League umpiring with Lynchburg, and one comment is it is regrowing, so it is in a rebirth phase, if I might be so bold enough to speak for them, but That might be partially why you didn't hear from them at least.
Sure.
I don't know about others, but that might be
Yeah.
why. One other question I had on slide 12. This was interesting to me. I remember a comment I made a few months ago, it might have been during the budget session, about this generally speaking. And if you look, there's one small public park, and I believe that's Heritage Park by the schools. And then you talked specifically about this area of town. Primarily that's Windsor Hills and Leesville Road and so on, Cornerstone as well. There's a private, I'm teeing all that off to say there's a private park in there that's actually quite substantial. And it is used a lot. My only question was, and I don't mean this derogatory in any way, but did you take into account other private assets within the city to incorporate the park desert scenario?
That's a great question. We typically look at private facilities under a different lens because they are private and they're out of your control, they're out of Jenny's control. So they may be a good supplement. Every community approaches them a little bit differently, and every privately held park is managed a little differently too. So it really kind of depends on a case-by-case basis. What we want to do is identify all the public parks and all the public assets currently to see how the public is served with those, if that's reasonable.
Just a general comment to staff, I would say if there's I don't want government stepping in on the private operations of it, but if there's a way we can partner with them and maybe utilize programming out there to incorporate that, I mean, it's a massive trail in a booming area, so that might be a way we can incorporate some existing assets that we can just put programming into. Final set of questions, and I thank my colleagues for the time. On slide 15, there was a reference, Barbara, to funding and staff is generally lower for an area our size. But then you also referenced on slide 17 that our maintenance and upkeep is tied to another department. So how do those two correlate? And when you take out the aspects of maintenance from Public Works, where are we in your mind as we stand from a proper staffing point for this type of a environment?
Yeah, that's really good insight. When we compare just on the recreation side of things, it's a little bit low. So separate out maintenance from other agencies. Okay. It trends toward the lower quartile.
Okay, thank you. And again, I want to thank everybody who's touched this. I think it's really set the course for us in a lot of good ways. As a fisherman, I'm always looking for ways to increase outdoor activity. And again, bringing up the comment of, especially the southern end of town, as population growth continues to go there, that would certainly be something I'd be willing to explore, is how do we get a public asset of just green space out in that general area. So thank you again to everybody, and I'm curious to hear what everyone else has to say. So thank you.
Councilmember Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Will, Barbara, again, thank you for your presentation and undertaking this analysis. I want to follow up on what Councilmember Feraldi said with regard to defining your inventory assets, those facilities that you've listed. And I think it was partly answered when you say you don't consider private assets as part of that, which is under the control of the city in Parks and Rec. Notwithstanding that qualifier, I think the city does have some contracts and agreements with private organizations. One that I know very well, dealing with youth soccer and adult soccer, whereby there are regulations and policies that the private entity is bound to honor with the city and its citizens. And looking at the statistics for youth baseball, for soccer, for tennis, and interestingly enough, for football, I think the inventory is significantly understated. For example, I know we have football facilities, but it says 0. Why is that?
From the inventory that we have in the publicly held facilities. So are they dedicated football fields, or are they cross-programmed with soccer or other sports? I know Peaksview has some rectangular fields that are used for a variety of sports. So I think that might be where it could have been lost in the numbers. And you also have good agreements with your school system, so that might be part of it as well.
That's very true, because the schools, although I guess for 9 months a year, they are under the jurisdiction of the school board, and then in the summer, they collaborate with Parks and Rec, and sometimes in school seasons, they are used by both public and private groups of school, private and public programs.
And it's great to have that relationship. The hard part is when you have scheduling conflicts, and how is that communicated? How's it organized? Does it get to the programmers and the city staff that the volleyball court is not available for this number of weeks and that sort of thing? So that's where you might have some conflicts, but it is great to have those relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's significant. I certainly am not offering my comments as criticism, but when we assess the realities of what we have and what is in the city, we need to look at what we really do have available, even though it may come to the charge by way of a combined collaborative agenda, and not assess the data as you have it and then draw conclusions from something that is not existent here in the city.
Absolutely, and this is one piece of a larger report where we'll talk about those private offerings in broad strokes, and kind of fill out that picture. If it helps, going back to this map, you'll see different service areas assigned to different types of parks. So when you look at a special use park, which includes some of your athletic parks, those really sometimes don't have a well-defined service area, because if you're a lacrosse player in Lynchburg, you're probably going to one facility or maybe a couple of facilities, no matter where you live. But when it comes to these neighborhood parks, which were really what people were wanting to see in the public comments, those are more passive. They'll have a playground, maybe some pavilions, but not necessarily geared towards pure athletics. So that was kind of interesting. And I think, to Mr. Feraldi's point, this southern part of town, that's really what we saw, the public wanting to see more of. Those neighborhood parks that, might be 5 to 15 acres with some playgrounds and a walking trail and just some passive open space where they could set up as a family and enjoy the day. So it was interesting.
I do want to offer one more comment, and
Sure.
I apologize if I might be overusing my time. In team sports, they usually are assigned to a group or program that has expertise in coaching the teams, regulating the activities, officiating the contests, something that I know Parks and Rec doesn't want to get into. They were at one point. I'm a soccer guy, and the city had soccer leagues, recreational soccer leagues, and they were being coached and officiated by parents, and the development of soccer skills was woefully inadequate. And the city approached me, who had a private soccer league that I started, and we created a united program whereby the private entity assumed the responsibilities for the public recreational programs, and we also use the expertise of our 6 college staff members. And lacrosse has now taken that and done the same thing. And that sort of collaboration not only has saved the city, Parks and Rec, I think, a substantial amount of money, but brought a level of expertise to the programs and the competition, particularly when it's team, that benefits the players in ways that the city doesn't have the resources to do. And that.
Also the staff, we really have to staff up if they managed all those programs, so it's really a benefit that you're involved.
Yeah, you got registration, you have uniforms, you got
Right.
equipment, you got
There's a lot to
officials,
it.
and compensation, and all of that is something that can be done by those who are enthused about it and engaged in it, and relieve it from the public budget. But anyway, just my observations on that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wyler.
Again, I want to thank you for the presentation, greatly appreciate it, and also to Jenny and her staff for the work you've done in preparing this, and also to the citizens of Lynchburg for completing the surveys and all the input that was involved in that. And also thank you for going out making an extra effort to make sure all parts of our community had input in surveys, from having a pop-up informational sessions to going to the community centers to online things to a variety of ways to make sure we connect with that community. I think I even participated in one of them, I believe, as well. So it was helpful to have an input of all the citizens. And one thing that's so important for us to remember, this is such important for our quality of life. You know, you can get so bogged down in working and this and that, but the trails and the enjoyment of life is so important. When people want to come to a community, you want to come to a community that's thriving, that has some amenities that you can go to the walking trails. I live right downtown, so my kids walk to the walking trails. We go to the Y, then they go to the walking trails. I need to go myself, but I don't do it like I should, so I'm going to work on that. But again, at least it's there for them, for my kids to go to. And also the slide 7 with the big ideas, you know, something for us to dream to. We may not have the resources now, but it's something we can look forward to and look to the future to, as Councilman Ferrari was mentioning, you know, some other partnerships in the future that we might can look forward to attract more persons to our community, more revenues for our tourist dollars to our revenue as well. And also, I appreciate the information about the different deserts. Like we looked at some food deserts in our community, also look at the park deserts. So it's good to look at with the map overlay and see where some of the gaps are. As we do have, look at our budget area as far as the projection for the future, we can kind of think of some ideas in the areas. There might be some spots where we could have a park. You know, I know, as Councilman Nelson said, the partnerships are crucial. You know, we can't do everything because the resources are limited, space is limited. So those partnerships are going to be crucial. So I appreciate all those partners that do have spaces that they can share with the community, and those different volunteers that take on the Little League and the football programs and all the citizens that work together, because this is what it's all about. It's about being a village and about working together, especially during times of small shrinking dollars and shrinking space. We must partner more. So I appreciate the information that you presented today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add too, what you said about park and recreation, quality of life, what's so great is as a result of the pandemic, the amount of participation all around the country has just really skyrocketed. Parks and facilities and programs have elevated even more in importance than what they had before the pandemic. So thanks for your comments.
Are there any other comments? Vice Mayor Wright.
Thank you all very much for being here, for the presentation, Jenny, and then, of course, all the other Parks and Rec colleagues who are here in the room with us this evening. So thank you all very much for being here. I did have a question just on the inventory question, because Councilmember Nelson got to what I was sort of curious about, which is I'm sorry, maybe I missed this in the sort of back and forth there, but what qualifies something to be on that inventory? Because, for example, if you look on slide 12, the City Stadium complex is listed there, but yet, and there's a very big football field in that complex that has the city logo on it, so, but it's not listed on the inventory.
Our understanding for that field specifically is that it's very limited. It's not open to general recreation for all ages. It's kind of a championship field, kind of a high school level field. So we treated that as a special facility, but not necessarily in that kind of general rec league kind of category, if that makes sense.
So it needs to be general, open to the public more or less
Typically.
consistently to be listed on the inventory?
You've got some really unique facilities here, including that city stadium and the baseball stadium right next door. Those are not something you see in every agency's inventory, but they're very limited because they're not open to pick-up play or practice for different leagues and things like that. So we did treat those a little differently, and if that's incorrect, we can definitely modify that.
But Councilmember Nelson's point, they will be, even those sort of special use facilities will be broken out in the main.
Yes,
in the final
absolutely.
report.
And you can see those here again. It's kind of in that special use category, so it doesn't have a defined service area because they are so limited and they're so unique to your system.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily help address the park desert issue, but it is an important part of your inventory and we want to speak to it appropriately.
Got it. So I'm sure like everybody else, I was pleasantly surprised to see the number of programs that we offer and how it compares to other communities. Can you sort of explain why that delta and what exactly defines a program? Is it a one-off class? Is it routine classes? Like what is a program so that we understand that?
Yeah, we take a look at programs that are listed in the program guide. We use that as the basis, and then we also take a look at registration, unique registrations. It could be a one-off, or it could be a 6-week class. As far as why that is, that's a good question. I mean, aside from the fact that I know when Jenny came on, one of her major goals was to really bolster what was used or what was done previously in terms of programming. But I'd have to sort of dig into that a little bit to find out why that is, why that delta is as large as it is.
And again, for the community, can you define what NRPA means?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, we should have done that. That's the National Recreation and Park Association. So they really are the ones that manage that park metrics, and they help with identifying what is like kind of the appropriate amount of amenities per community.
Understood. Well, I think this is just so important and very exciting, so thank you all very much for
Thank you.
presenting today.
Thank you. Councilmember Halverson.
I guess since Vice Mayor Wright talked about the programming, that is something that is very striking and very alarming. I think that's more, when you think about some of the programming, you think about pickleball, for example. Well, nobody heard of it 10 years ago. And so rather than us kind of, vacillating for different programs of things that are faddish or functional or whatever, I'd really like to see us do more on the way of the facilities. And as you mentioned, as far as the trails for the obesity, for lack of activity and exercise, these are things that everybody can use without recurring cost associated with them. That you have to staff it, or you have to have somebody who's a professional that can coach the kids or coach somebody. So when I look at those programs, I really would love to see us actually focus a little bit better. You mentioned about being unique. Well, if we do everything, we're not unique in anything, and so if we have, we got pickleball, you got rummy, you got cooking, you got coding, or whatever, all these different things require so much staffing because it's programmed. You probably have 6 people that show up to a class. So with that, and then when you look at the fees to the revenue, or the fees of the revenue fees to the expenses, that's pretty alarming. 16.5%, which means 83.5% is funded by the public taxpayer. And so when 6 people are using a class, to me, that's not a good use of a public entity. And so as we kind of recraft this, I would really like to see that focus more, not just on, that's neat, you do a lot of programs and stuff, but we should do it to the masses, because this is a public facility, it's a public good. And it shouldn't be more that, it shouldn't be, 6 people wanting to participate in a class. And I can appreciate the customer service nature of it, but that isn't what our, really should be as a city. And if we focus, we'll have the ability to do a little bit better and broader and a little more laser rather than a shotgun trying to do everything. When I see the cost recovery, obviously that's probably not very good. 16.5% covering the cost of somebody, whatever the activity happens to be. The trails, I think, are a fabulous thing where we can actually, everybody can use. And you heard that a lot because they're there. And because people can use them differently. They have open space and green space that somebody can go read or picnic or throw a Frisbee or do whatever. It doesn't have to be some formalized, structured event. That's the way the parks really should be. I mean, I think they can be, I think we could add a little bit to our trail system. If you wanted to get a little more activity involved in there. Around the lakes in Minneapolis, they have lots of little extra stationary objects where you can do pull-ups on. You go around a little bit more, you can do, leg extension, or, not a weight room, but I mean, you got little bars. You can do different things, and you can kind of go around, and if you want to do a little muscular thing as well, but it's not manned, it's not staffed. We've got equipment that everybody can use it. It helps with, people actually exercising and doing, activity. The beginning of this, you talked about the 41% are 15 to 35 years old, and you had mentioned because of a lot of the colleges and universities here. And so I guess about 41%, that's somewhere around 32,000 people. Of that, there's probably 12,500 school-age kids. There's probably about 20,000 that are college kids. Possibly, if that, obviously you went a little further than 35, but I think there's about 20,000 college kids in Lynchburg, in the area, between how many are at Liberty and Lynchburg College and the other schools. And you look at some of their facilities, I mean, it's unbelievable. And so counting the ability to access some of these, I mean, there's things that are, you'd never hear of any other place almost in the United States. There's one Snowflex. I mean, you have 60 miles of trails to hike and bike up there. They have indoor aquatics. They got lots of things that they do for their specific students. So I think this should really be kind of geared not just the broad brush of a youthful community, but actually, the people that aren't, met with their cost of their school. So our public goods should be, kind of for our citizens. Obviously, anybody can use them. So with that, again, the 719 programs, I can't even get my head around how many things there are. I know there's cooking and there's bambooing and there's knitting and there's pinochle and all sorts of different things that used to be fabulous things, If there's a way that we don't have to staff that and man it and have somebody actually having a program that says, okay, here's when it starts, but have the ability and the facilities for folks to use. Several years ago, well, a long time ago now, but part of the city's, some of the school facilities, we decided and said, yeah, that would be a good use to go from regular grass to artificial turf on lots of these fields. Why? So they can be used by everybody. So they can be used by the soccer on Monday and lacrosse on Tuesday and field hockey Wednesday afternoon. And so there's supposed to be a big multi-use and purpose for that, not simply sequestered and saying only for school functions at this time. So I recognize as Vice Mayor Wright was talking about the city stadium, obviously that's not something that's just used every day, but I'm sure there's other football leagues that utilize that. They book it ahead of time and whatnot. So those are some of my big observations that I think it's, to just kind of fixate, to kind of really say, what can we do about having a little more targeted as far as programs? There's lots of neat things to do. And I don't like to see us competing with other entities. We have lots of gymnasiums and gyms that do CrossFit or the YMCA, as Sterling said, and other places where they have these kind of things. They're anchors in the community that are trying to build their customer base. I don't like to see us kind of competing with those things that are already out there that somebody can get in the private market, especially when we're having to subsidize it at 83.5%. So lots of good things out there. Some of the maps of the parks, I think, has been pointed out, and I don't think that map is any way accurate, from a desert kind of standpoint. Some of the facilities where you have big empty spaces were actually spaces that were intentionally proposed and designed by the city's planning staff to have a traditional neighborhood development. Two of those are big areas that said, here's what's going to happen and here's what's going to serve the people in this area. Part of their traditional neighborhood development plan came forward and said, hey, here's what we're going to do. In order to get this extra density, we're going to have trails, or we're going to have these parks, or we're going to have this swimming pool, or we're going to have all sorts of things that are for our citizens in that area. And it's a big area. And so if we now just say, well, that doesn't count, it kind of completely goes against the reality. So those are just some of my thoughts, but I don't mean to be, I think there's lots of room for improvement, I would say. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Feraldi.
Just very briefly, I want to offer just one or two things. I think Councilmember Nelson makes up some good points. I understand the intent of this is to draw, pure public assets from your perspective. But I do think there's some good wisdom in trying to figure out how we can incorporate into something like this map that brings in some of those private assets. And then similarly to my thoughts about how we can find our partnerships with those private assets, I'd also be interested in finding out what it might take to open up some of our more, from your perspective, confined assets that we can't use. So, okay, let's look at the policies so we can align them to that point. And then last point, just by nature of living out there and utilizing it the way I do, I did neglect to mention this aspect. So down Leesville Road, as you cross into Campbell County, there is a public park, and actually a quite big one, and it's much more of a natural park, lake, gazebo, not much to there. My point is, I would hope we can take some account as to what's in the surrounding area. So if we were to go follow up and say, all right, great spot for a park, well, there's also a Campbell County Park right down the road. So, let's just be strategic about where we're planning these for the future, and just want to offer some further comments at the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilder.
Just really, really brief. Again, I had it in my notes to mention as well, but I'll save it for later. I just want to talk now in reference to some of the CDBG funds that have been used to renovate some of our community centers. I know I went to open house at Fairview Heights recently, and there's one on Friday at Yoder Center at 10. I just want to commend the staff for the renovations, and also the CDBG committee for making that investment, and the citizens of Lynchburg for making that investment. And one last quick point, and we talked about programming, there's a lot of programming. I know for behalf like the Jubilee Center, I can't speak for Parks and Rec, but we have partnerships that don't really cost us anything. That person will bring in services to us. So you might see a lot of programs there that really that are donated from volunteer services or through partnerships. Again, I can't speak for Parks and Rec, but a lot of things might be through partnerships that people bring in services. So I commend you, to continue to encourage you to continue to do that, to save funds and bring in additional partnerships to save dollars for our citizens. And I just trust the staff will be economical with the resources. But one thing about it is it's called a community. It's called a village. That's what we do. We work together. I might have I think either the Rotary Club or one of the clubs is working on a park for children, and it's going to have a handicap swing in the Kiwanis. Thank you. Kiwanis is going to have a handicap slide there for children. I don't have a handicapped child. It may not mean much to me, but to a parent that has a handicapped child that can utilize that swing, that's going to mean a lot to them. So I appreciate the diversity that we have. And that's what a city has. That's what a village does. We work together because I may not need this, I may not need that, but because of situations in life, they might utilize the resources. And we pull those resources together. It was what's called a community. So again, I appreciate Parks and Rec and the diversity you have for all the citizens of Lynchburg. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Councilmember Tweedy.
I just think maybe, how do we further and create an economic flow utilizing our facilities or our parks and recreation, our trails, how do we connect that greater to the opportunity for some type of economic development? Maybe you all mentioned it and I didn't.
Well, many agencies, nationally, the National Recreation and Park Association, an average Park and Recreation Department receives about 70% tax support, 30% earned revenue. So a lot of municipalities all around the country focus on that non-tax revenue and how to grow it. So there's opportunities from a grant perspective, there's opportunities from corporate sponsorship or partnerships, public-private partnerships, just working with other community providers to ensure that there's no duplication of services, taking a look at how fees are assessed, what's the policy for establishing fees. is a good way of taking a look at it as well. And then many communities nowadays will develop a foundation, conservancies that will fundraise on behalf of the park and recreation system. So there's a lot of different avenues that communities all around the country are taking a look at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, all the work you've done, and thank Jenny and her team for facilitating this study. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item is Water Resources 20-Year Capital Improvement Plan, and Dr. Reed Whitaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nobody ever says it back to us. I appreciate it. So we are really excited to start this conversation with you today, which will hopefully be several conversations about the future of our water, sewer, and stormwater systems in Lynchburg. As you know, Lynchburg for many years has been a leader in the provision of water and sewer and stormwater management throughout the Commonwealth, and we certainly hope that we are bringing that to the next level this evening. So probably 2 years ago, I sat down with Tim and I wanted to talk with him about sort of an unusual idea that I had, and that was to develop a multi-decade utility master plan so that we could make sure that we were investing appropriately in the major infrastructure that is needed for the long term, and making sure that our finances are appropriately managed, that we are ensuring the health and safety of the community, as well as the environment and fire protection and all the other things that our water system does. So at that time, Tim sort of scratched his head and said, but then got his team to work and started working on a 20-year plan that we know will lead to the sustainability of the water, sewer, and stormwater systems. We do want to start off tonight saying that you don't have to make any decisions tonight. We just want to give this information to you as well as help you have this information so that you can discuss these further items in the future. So I will say that you're going to see some pretty large numbers tonight. And frankly, some daunting numbers potentially. But I'm going to ask you to do two things. The first is that remember that we are talking about a 20-year time period. And the second is that I hope that you will think about this as a very positive step from your very professional staff that is intending to make sure that we are managing our finances and our assets as responsibly as we can for as long as we can as we go along. So I do want to say one more thing before I turn it over to Tim. Speaking of professional staff, Tim's going to come up and give you lots of information, but I know that you know that Tim is a wonderful professional as well as all of our resources, our staff resources. But what you don't know is that Tim really is a leader in water and wastewater and stormwater matters throughout Virginia. And really, I think, has been president of just about every water-related association in Virginia. And so that's so much so that he was recently awarded as the Herbert W. Davis Distinguished Service Award for the Virginia section of the American Water Works Association for his more than 20 years of rendering distinguished and unifying service to the Virginia section. So you have a lot of assets here, a lot of really high-quality folks working for you. And Tim is going to talk to you about the really great work that's going to go on for the next number of years. And we hope that you are excited for all the work that we are mapping out tonight. So put on your seatbelt, and we're going to talk about utility systems for the next few years. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Reed. So, and some of you heard a very similar presentation at the August PDC meeting. So there will be a lot of recap related to that as well, but there's a little bit of new information as well. Just to give you an overview, so what I'm going to do is review our infrastructure needs. Again, informational purposes only. We're not asking for any type of decision tonight. And then we're going to look a little bit primarily at the water and sewer fund and the water and sewer assets. We touched a little bit on the stormwater assets. Those are a little more unknown because we don't have the history with the stormwater system as we do the water and wastewater system. Then we're going to talk about our needs versus realistic goals, because we can't do everything that we really need to do. That's just not going to be possible, but we do need to ramp up what we're doing in order to be sustainable from the standpoint of making sure in future decades and future generations that we have adequate water and sewer services available. And we like to say that, we're stewards of the most important resource. and we do have a dedicated team working to ensure that. And then we're going to ultimately get into more financial discussions with you and financial strategies on how we might be able to tackle some of these needs going forward. So with that, just some of the assumptions that we had. When we started putting together our projections, typically we put together a 5-year projection. So we're looking at our infrastructure needs for the next 5 years and also our operational needs as well. And so we're really just expanding that out to 20 years. And as we expand it out, there's a lot more unknowns that we have to deal with from a regulatory standpoint, operational standpoint, various things. There's a lot of unknowns that we have to deal with. But what we do know is if we ramp up our capital program, we're going to have some staff to help administer that because their staff is already stretched pretty thin. And then we want to do what we can to minimize water and sewer rate increases. We really have not done much as far as rate increases over the past several years there for a while. Really, ever since I started with the city up until a few years ago, we were asking for regular rate increases of 2 or 3%, something that helps keep up with inflation and helps keep up with the additional needs that we have. So we really need to be thinking about that in the future. And then we also assumed that one of the big revenue sources that we have in the last several years is our truck hauled waste. And I mentioned this a number of times before to City Council, the leachate that gets hauled to the wastewater treatment plant. We're assuming that that's stable. There are some potential regulations that may change that, and also there's no guarantee that the landfills are still going to continue to bring leachate to us, but we want to, at least at this point, we're assuming that's stable. And then we also are assuming that we will continue to meet council's fiscal policies as well as and as long as we have a CSO consent order, we're hoping to finish that program in the next 5 years, and there's some monitoring that we have to do after that to ensure that we're in compliance. But we need to meet our CSO financial criteria that's in our consent order. And one of the things that we had assumed this year, and we didn't ask for a sewer rate increase this year, was that with the pandemic, median household income was going to be relatively flat. But what we've seen is, and as we're starting to prepare our report to the state on our CSO program, we're seeing that we're actually well under our CSO median household income requirements. So we're going to have to address that in the upcoming year as well. So, one of the things that we did, the American Society of Civil Engineers ranks the nation's infrastructure, and you've seen this slide before as well. But what we did was we kind of did the same thing with their water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure internally, just to help make sure that we're focused on the areas that we need to focus on most. And what pops out to us is the water distribution system and the sewer collection system are the two biggest assets that we have and the two biggest liabilities that we have. So we really need to be addressing the needs there. Sorry, I don't know how to operate this.
For anybody who might be watching, can you define what those are?
What the assets are?
Yes, sorry, the ones that are graded D or D minus. Can you explain just what they are? Because it's not, I don't think it's, explanations aren't included.
Sure. So the wastewater conveyance system is a D minus, and that is the sewer, the pipes in the ground, and this is true with the water system as well. The biggest challenges we have are the pipes in the ground. One, assessing the condition is very difficult. It's very time consuming. The water system's even more challenging. We can put a camera in the sewer system and assess the condition of the sewer lines, but we don't have the same. There is some technology, but it's very expensive to assess the condition of the inside of a water system that's buried. So we go by a lot of there's a number of things that we look at when we're assessing the condition of a water system. For example, we're looking at the age of the system. We're looking at the number of breaks, water line breaks that we have. We're looking at the condition of the water system, the material that it's made out of, and whether or not the pipe size is adequate or not. So all that goes into assessing the condition. And similar to the water system, we look at capacity issues with the sewer system, condition of the sewer system, and age of the sewer system. Because one of the things that we want to prevent water lines from breaking, and we want to prevent sewers from overflowing. So those are two issues that we have to deal with on a regular basis. Yep.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, I'm sorry.
May I follow
Yes.
up?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. The very first item on your report card shows the raw water system.
Right.
It's a C+.
Right.
I have always heard that Lynchburg is literally blessed by having its extraordinary source of water being Peddler Lake and the way in which it flows by gravity to get to the treatment centers here in Central Virginia. Why is it only a C+? Is that because of the age of the pipes from Peddler to Lynchburg or something else?
That's primarily it. The pipes are over 80 years old now, and for 80-year-old pipe, they're in very good condition. But we do have, where we have failures on the raw water line from the reservoir to the city, primarily is in the joints. The joints are deteriorating, and there's a joint every 20 feet, so that can be significant. But we did a condition assessment, a detailed condition assessment on the pipeline probably 7 or 8 years ago, and found that it was still in pretty good shape for its age. But at some point down the road, that's such a major asset, and it would be a major undertaking to replace it or even renew it. Because of the age, primarily, it's on there as a C+. It's in good shape now, not something we have to worry about for the next 20 or 30 years or within this time period, but we need to keep it on our radar to make sure that we don't neglect it in the future.
Was that assessment 7, 8 years ago done after the underwater pipe that crossed the James River cracked and hemorrhaged and spilled out, and we had to replace that?
Yes, it was after that. Yes.
Okay.
And we typically have 1 or 2 joints blow out every year. You may recall we've had a couple of issues on Rivermont Terrace where we've had the line break there. That's a section of pipe that is concerning to us, and we need to probably address that because it runs very close to some houses on Rivermont Terrace. And had it broken near one of the houses, it could have been catastrophic. So
We would have a new pond at the bottom of Rivermont Terrace, wouldn't we?
that's correct. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So to follow up on that, so if it gets a C, I'm now questioning your grading schedule. So if something gets a C+,
But it is good for 30 to 40 years, as you just stated, how do you ever get an A? I mean, 30 to 40 years, I recognize that there could be things, with the joints, as you mentioned, but.
Well, what we do, and that's also the entire system. That includes a couple pump stations as well on the James River and the force mains from the James River to the treatment plants. So it's not just the raw water line, but that's the biggest asset that we have. What we are anticipating with that is that we wouldn't be replacing the entire raw water line all at once. So we would start looking at critical sections like at Rivermont Terrace where if it breaks in that location, it could cause a significant amount of damage. And it has broken in the vicinity of homes there recently a number of times. So we want to make sure it's on our radar, and probably within the next 10 years, we'll probably be looking at replacing that section. And there may be other sections over the next 30 to 40 years that we want to address and replace, but try to avoid replacing the entire pipeline, 22 miles of pipeline.
So how many miles? 20?
22.
So
Yes.
22 miles of pipeline, and a couple sections that we know of right now are pretty bad. You know, that's quarter of a mile or a mile kind of. So how does this C plus come about?
Again, it's related to the age, because we know that that water line's not going to last 200 years. And we know that in order to maintain the water line, we need to invest a little over time into the water line and look at and it's, you know, it may be more than a quarter mile section of line at a time that we address. We may go in and do some sort of lining project or whatever to extend the life of the asset. So, you know, from our standpoint, a C plus is it's relative compared to like the water treatment plants. They've gone through recent upgrades, so they're in really good shape for what they are. A brand new asset we would consider at an A, but when you look at all the assets together, that's how we, you know, with the raw water system, that's how it came up with a C plus. So. And it's not a perfect grading scale. It's subjective and based upon a number of employees and reports that we have making an assessment of the condition. So just looking at the water, breaking the water system down by age, the red areas in the water system are over 100 years old. The yellow areas, and the text is a little hard to read, but it's over 70 years old, so kind of right outside the planning period of what we're looking at now, and then green is less than 70 years old. The red comprises 44 miles of water line that's over 100 years old, and some of that water line is actually approaching 200 years old. And you can see most of it's around the downtown area and the more densely populated area. So we are addressing a lot of the downtown water lines, obviously. But that program needs to be ongoing, and we need to be expanding that out from the central business district to the other areas around downtown. And then as those assets are renewed, we still have the yellow assets that will be coming on the heels of that. So we're not going to, within the next 20 years, we're not going to be replacing 44 miles of water line. So we need to be thinking ahead.
I guess one thing, you know, I've always seen this, and I've seen this when you've done this presentation several times. And I used to always think, oh my goodness, it's old. But you now look back at the craftsmanship of things that are old. My house is well over 100 years old. Sterling's house is probably 200 years old. You know, I mean, there's things that are old in the craftsmanship, and you have some of these old wooden lines that are petrified. Hopefully there's other metrics that go with the obsolescence rather than just saying the age of it.
There is. We look at the break history, we look at the size, we look at the material. A lot of the older water lines, as you mentioned, the material in the very old water lines is probably better than like around the 1940s and 50s because steel wasn't readily available. But the problem with the old water lines, it's not just the pipe integrity issue, it's the water quality issue as well. Every week we're flushing hydrants down at the Terry Hotel because there's sediment and buildup on the inside of the pipelines because they're unlined. They're old cast iron lines that are unlined. And we've got sections of pipe in our office that, you think about clogged arteries, that's kind of what happens to the old water pipes. It's called tuberculation that builds up on the inside of the water line that decreases fire flow capacity, creates issues with water quality, and then if we have large fire flows or water line breaks, and we have discolored water that we have to deal with as well. So those are some of the challenges that we look at from that standpoint.
Is there a way to I know you said it was an expensive thing to purchase the system like you do with the camera infiltration in the sewer. Is there a way to utilize something, you know, whether it be on a a renting, a lease arrangement to utilize some equipment to kind of run through and?
Well, years ago, the city used to call what we called pigging a water line. We have actually some of the old pigs that we used when we cleaned the water lines in our water treatment plant, and that device would be used to go through and clean the tuberculation, the stuff on the inside of the pipe off. But that created a lot of other problems. That broke valves, created a lot of discolored water and water quality issues. We'd have to dig up each intersection and remove pieces of the device out of the valves. There are other technology devices that can be put in water lines that analyze the condition of the water lines and look at the thickness of the pipe and see if it's deteriorated over the years and that type of thing. We wouldn't have the staff that could do that. That would have to be contracted out, but it could be done.
Thank you.
This is based upon size, and it doesn't look like a lot, but all the red lines on here are water lines that are under 4 inches in diameter. And those do not have, the issue with those is they do not have adequate fire flow capacity. And there's 18 miles of those lines that at some point need to be addressed. It's pretty much scattered throughout the city, but those are water lines that really need to be, and we do have a replacement program for those small diameter mains that we continuously work on, but that's another component of the water system that we need to be aware of. This graph basically shows 3 things. One is the bottom red line is basically the average of our water system replacement rate as it stands now. And again, we're comparing it to age of the water system because that's the easiest metric to compare it to. But and it varies from year to year depending on what projects we have in the pipeline. So the first several years of this show the replacement rate spiking up and down quite a bit, and that depends upon, again, the projects we have in the queue at the time. But if you look at over the last 5 to 10 years of history, the red line is our average replacement rate. In order to catch up and address the water lines that we have that are either very old, undersized, or defective material, if we were going to have the water lines on a 100-year replacement rate, then we'd have to look at the top graph. So we'd have to be replacing about 33,000 feet per year for the next 20 years, and then after that about 24,000 feet per year. If we drop that back to a 150-year replacement rate, which is probably more realistic for us to handle, but definitely more than we're doing now, we would have to, over the next 20 years, replace about 22,000 feet and then drop that back to about 16,000 feet per year. And even under the best conditions, the best waterline material, 150 years is really kind of stretching the limit of the asset viability and integrity. So we really want to be, right now we're at about a 200-year replacement cycle. So a lot of our water lines are not going to last 200 years. And then we're also working on a water system master plan that's going to look at more broadly what our needs are in the future, now and in the future. So we're looking at population projection and the distribution of that, as well as the water demand projections and the distribution, to make sure we have the assets in place going forward to address the needs in the future. So we're not seeing a lot of growth in the water system usage over the next 20 or 30 years, but it is increasing probably 14 to 15% over the next 30 years based upon our analysis. Right now, we're treating about 10.5 million gallons per day, 10.5 million gallons per day on a regular basis, and we anticipate by 2050 that's going to be about 11.9 million gallons per day. So from a water plant capacity standpoint, that's not a big issue. We have 26 million gallons of capacity in our water treatment plants. So we're okay there. It's really just looking at the water system and making sure that we can distribute that water around the city where it's needed in the future.
And I think a few years ago, we used to do more than that per day, right? When we sold it to like the counties and some of the water, now they have their own filtration or?
We still sell, and the big issue there was with Bedford County because
Yeah.
they developed a source on Smith Mountain Lake. And they're providing about 500,000 gallons of water per day to the forest area through that system. By contract, they're obligated to purchase 1 million gallons per day from us continuously. So it did reduce the amount of water we were selling Bedford. And with the closing of the training center in Amherst, that has reduced how much Amherst buys from us. And that's kind of, over the years, it has really, since I've been here, our water production has been relatively stable. We've had some ups and downs, but if you look at the average, it's been pretty stable because of, even though our population has gone up, average household demand has gone down significantly. So just looking at the 20 years priorities, we're looking at really about a need of waterline replacement of about $120 million over 20 years. The $41 million for water distribution system improvements, that includes things like water tanks, water pump stations, the other assets besides just the pipelines. General facilities improvements, are not necessarily associated with the treatment, the water treatment portion of the plants, but we have other facilities that need to be maintained and maintenance as well. We continue with downtown renewal of the water system of about $24 million over the next 20 years. We have a water tank rehabilitation program in place now, and that will continue. Basically, that inspects water tanks and repaints them and extends the life of those assets almost indefinitely as long as we keep maintaining them as they should be. Water meter replacement, those water meters need to be replaced about every 12 to 15 years overall. And then we have, one of the big unknowns is the regulatory requirements. There are two big issues right now that are facing water utilities. It's PFAS. These are called forever chemicals that are in a lot of different things. That potentially we don't have, we did some sampling from the Peddler Reservoir and there was no traces of PFAS, which we would expect. But there could be PFAS in the James River, so at some point we may have to upgrade our treatment to be able to handle whatever PFAS is in the James River. There's a lot of legislation and regulation associated with that ongoing, both at the state and federal level. There's also a federal lead and copper rule revision, and the big issue with that is that based upon the federal rule, water utilities are responsible for the service lines from the water main all the way to the house, not just to the meter, from determining whether or not the service line is lead or a galvanized line that was ever downstream of a lead line. We have to go through and verify every water service in the city from the main to the house, the type of line it is, and then we have to have a replacement program in place to renew the system, the water line from the main to the house. And there's other funding sources available for the private side, but we would have to facilitate that effort. And there's many other requirements associated with that we would need to address as well. So overall, for the next 20 years, we're looking at a water system CIP need of about $250 million, or about $12.5 million per year. Sewer capacity is another issue. Oops, sorry. So the red segments of the sewer lines basically, regardless of, this is separate from CSO, so this is outside the CSO areas. This is just the sewer lines that serve the rest of the city, and it's looking at the major sewer lines, the major interceptors. And what we want to do, technically, we're not supposed to have any overflows during any type of rainfall event on the rest of the sewer system. Right now, if we get a 2-year rainfall event, the red lines on this map, there's overflows at those points. The sewer system surcharges, there's overflows at that point, and what the big impact of that could be is that we could have a consent order or some type of order to fix that, but it also could end up impacting development opportunities and growth within the city if we had to put a moratorium on sewer connections, for example. So those are some areas that we really need to address as we start looking at our growth in the future. More of the lines turn red, so this is projecting out to like 2050 and beyond. These are other areas that we really need to be addressing going forward.
So it sounds like one good way to stop all the apartments coming in is to not fix our sewer system, and there'll be a moratorium on apartments coming in. That may be another way to skin a cat.
Could be. The other area that we've talked about some before with City Council is the unsewered areas. This is a big challenge in how we address this. There's about 2,500 lots throughout the city that are on septic systems. A lot of them are clustered in neighborhoods, and the outlined areas are where those clusters are. The challenge is there's not a good way to pay for this because certainly the private homeowner can't afford the average cost per lot for the sewer extension. So that means if we extend service, then the rest of the ratepayers have to bear some of that burden as well. And then trying to incentivize the customers to connect sooner rather than later is also a challenge because it doesn't do any good to build a sewer asset and have it sit for 20 years and nobody connect to it. But this is kind of a ticking time bomb, if you will, because if we don't have sewer in those areas, when the septic systems fail, the homeowners won't have any other options. Especially one of the things, we looked at a number of things when we prioritize this. We look at lot size, are the lots large enough to rebuild the septic system, the drain fields? We look at the soil conditions, we look at the number of, we've worked with the health department on determining how many septic system failures we've had in those areas. And you can see the range of costs per lot. So we range from a minimum of about $20,000 per lot to extend sewer service, and that doesn't include the private side connection, to up to $122,000 per lot. So again, just something to be aware of, and we're really starting to look at that in more detail as we go forward.
So Tim, when the septic system fails and there's no other recourse as far as contractor coming and, redigging or whatever you got to do, or cleaning or doing whatever, is then the house would be condemned? Unless there's no ability?
Potentially, yes. And septic systems, that's another area where regulations are getting more and more strict. And rebuilding the septic system is not cheap either. It's $20,000 to $25,000 potentially to do that.
So everybody's going to be weighing the cost. Do I pay $20,000 now and a connection fee versus maybe having to rebuild it later at $25,000?
Right, and we're certainly not looking at the average household paying the $20,000 for the extension. They'll pay whatever our fees are, and maybe we develop some sort of incentive program for them to connect soon after the line's there, rather than wait 10 or 20 years. Maybe we have reduced connection fees for them, because it doesn't do us any good if people aren't connecting. So
And you're not going to have access to it unless there's a myriad of people that say, hey, we'll all do it, right? I mean, you don't just extend the sewer, just,
Well, right now, the system is, it puts the burden on the property owner. If you have a failing septic system, in which we have a number of those requests every year, we have a citizen come to us and ask for a sewer extension. So basically, it puts the burden on the property owner to get half of their neighbors to connect to the sewer system when it's extended. Otherwise, it's not economically feasible for us to extend it, and it's not economically feasible for the property owner.
so if the cost is like, for example, let's just say it's the minimum cost per lot, the $20,700, what you would do is then have that factored in. Obviously, you can't just charge everybody else that's in the system more for it, but a way to have like like the present value of this increased payment over the several years. So if the 20,000 is what's there, we're going to actually add that to your bill for every month for the next 20 years in order to augment that, or?
Well, typically what would happen is that it would be absorbed by the other customers in the sewer system. And at least a portion of it, not all of it, but a portion of it.
So what's the incentive then for the other customers to want other people to connect to the sewer, other than my bill's going to go up?
That's the challenge, is trying to figure out a financial solution to this. And we've looked at it, we've started developing various policies on this, and a lot of those policies have fatal flaws that it's not going to be financially feasible for the homeowner to connect. It's not going to be, it's really challenging to figure out a good method. We could have mandatory connections, but that,
I guess with that,
that's not a good option either.
other than maybe our city assessor, I guess he's not here, but other than if it's already kind of baked into the cake, the value of the property. So if somebody says, oh, you got water and sewer and stormwater, that's kind of already built into the value of the house, where a place that doesn't have the water and sewer may have built less value in there, because understanding you got this potential huge cost that's coming later.
Right.
So
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. All right. So solids master plan, this is just the wastewater plant, looking at the solids, the sludge handling facilities at the wastewater plant. And basically the facilities we have now are reaching their end of the useful life, so we need to be looking and planning ahead for it. Again, sewer fund overall CIP needs for the next 20 years is about $400 million, or about $20 million per year in the sewer fund. And stormwater fund, again, not a lot of detail right now. We've got a lot more to figure out on the stormwater fund.
So just real quick on the stormwater, if you
Yes.
could. I mean, obviously, when you watch the news and you see communities devastated because of floods and rain and whatnot, I know we're not as susceptible, but there's lots of places around Lynchburg that when the rain comes, the stormwater system isn't enough because the pipes are too small to take that down. So hopefully the plan will focus on those kind of priorities to make sure we have adequate ability for the stormwater to work. And
That's definitely one of the big priorities, because we get a tremendous amount of drainage complaints.
yes.
And then we have water quality goals we have to meet along with that as well. So basically, again, recapping, this is expenditures over the last 5 years. In water, we've averaged about $4 million per year, sewer about $15 million, and stormwater about $1.3 million in infrastructure expenses. Our needed expenditures are in the sewer fund about $20 million versus $15 million. Water is a big lift at $12.5 million versus $4 million. And then we don't really know exactly what's needed in stormwater at this point. A little more realistic goal would be to look at the 150-year replacement cycle, and again, just as a benchmark. And so targeting about $10 million per year in the water fund to spend annually. and then targeting about $15 million in the sewer fund to spend annually. So again, with summary, right now we're not meeting the stormwater, water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure needs. We're falling further behind each year, and we need to really look at our expenditures on on those assets to make sure that we're being sustainable in the long run. And with that, I'll take any final questions and discussions.
Sam, thank you for your presentation. And it's interesting here for a second time, you do pick up some different questions, so I do have some associated with your slides. On slide 5, and hopefully this is a pretty straightforward answer, but I'm kind of curious. I'm particular about words in a lot of different ways, but similar to our parks conversation, I honed in on the word relative, and then I see green is less than 70 years old. Vaguely and briefly, how, that's quite a large divide. I mean, are we talking most of them are 5 to 15, or there's a bulk that's 50? I mean, that's a pretty steep.
And we can break that down further if you would like. We've got, especially the newer assets, we have more detailed information on when they were installed. But we were just kind of looking at what are the critical areas that we needed to focus on now, so I wanted to simplify it for this presentation.
Sure, and the only reason I asked, I mean, just for someone who has no idea what we're talking about, I mean, if we're looking at this was put in 5 years ago, you know, in my mind, would be interesting to know some of those differences rather than, okay, this is at 70 years, and, you know, this is the cut, I realize that, but that might be a little bit helpful.
Yep, we can break that down.
On slide 7, having trouble reading my own handwriting, so forgive me. When do we hit the catastrophe level, right? So when do the lines cross where the rate we're at right now, even if it increased marginally, starts to not be enough and keep up with the failures? So when do those narratives cross and we're in very bad position?
Well, I'll use the term that the American Water Works Association used. We're kind of at the dawn of the replacement era now, so we really need to be, we're there, I think. There's not going to be a clear date that we reach that point, but right now we're falling further behind every year. So our assets, we have a lot of assets that are well over 100 years old that we need to address.
Again, in my mind, if we could have some, for a non-water person, some guidance as to say, you know, I realize you dictated, you know, we need to increase per year. We're sitting at 4 million. I get that. But if I can get, at least in my mind, all right, by this point, we need to be at certain levels. So that way we're not meeting that intersection.
Right.
I don't know if I'm articulating that well enough, but I think you know what I'm asking for. Something that I can put visually in my mind where I know, okay, we're meeting this metric.
On a good asset management program, you replace an asset at the optimal time. If you wait longer, you're going to be spending more money on maintenance than if you replace it too soon and you lose some of the value of the asset. So we'll try to pin that down for you a little bit better.
Thank you. And forgive me, I wrote this down first and ran out of space. But on slide 3, your inflation of 3% on fees and so on, I think, and also in use. I realize, you know, you made the statement about how we're not working in a inflation adjustment each year at this point, but does that match the increase in use? I would hate for us, if we're going to be considering a fee increase, I don't want us increasing any more than we have to, and making sure if we're increasing by 2.5%, we're only increasing by 2.5%.
Well, so there's two things there. One is the inflation rate. Basically, you know, a lot of our chemical costs, our capital project costs, and everything else are going up. And I think we just did an analysis. Inflation rate the last year was like 5%. So if our revenue stays the same, we're not keeping up with inflation. So we need to factor in. Inflation doesn't impact all areas of our operation the same, but we need to meet that minimum level of inflation with our rate increases, and then plus some to try to get caught up. So we're trying to figure out exactly what that plus sum is, if that makes sense.
On the My final comment, you've brought up multiple regulatory and legislative initiatives, and my only question would be if there's a way we could and then also I don't know if I would want it on there, so stipulate that, but if this might be something we can include in a legislative agenda to Richmond, or a way we can market that to folks and at least be a part of the process in showing how the financial impacts of those regulations and pieces of legislation would impact the city. That I would be interested in seeing what that looks like.
We've actually included that in the draft legislative agenda that will be coming to you soon. So.
Sweet. Overall, I understand this is a great need, obviously, and we have a lot of opportunities for investment in a lot of different ways. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Wotica and you, Tim, for Mr. Mitchell for helping us and having the foresight to at least getting us to this point and saying, all right, so what do we do now? And I'm looking forward to seeing what the presentation is to get us to that next step. I realize this is a massive economic development piece, residential piece, and all sorts of other implications are associated with this, and this is much bigger than I think any of us will ever really envision. All that being said, we're in a tough time right now with a lot of folks in the community, economically speaking, and so anything we can do to leverage all these monies coming from federal, state, and so on to offset costs, at least in my mind, should be done, so that way we're not increasing more fees and taxes on our constituents, so on our neighbors. So thank you.
And just kind of along those lines, I figured up about how much grant money we've received over the last 20 years, and we've received over $100 million in grant money for our water and wastewater system. So we definitely will continue to pursue that.
I'm sorry, one final note. Just generally speaking on that map, I think it was slide 12, you had Leesville Road opened up as an area of need for sewer connection, but by my zooming in, I could tell that, some portions of that area already have connections to it. Just a general comment, if
this map is...
Yeah, I know it's very hard to see from here, but all the way down at the bottom, down Leesville by Campbell County, some of those areas within that purple outline are included and do have some green pipe going in. So I'd be curious to know what the I guess ROI on that would be to connect that area. So
and we have each of these areas broken down. We're working on a sewer master plan now, so we know exactly which lots don't have sewer and what we need to do to provide service there and which lots do. So
thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Tim, I really appreciate your presentation. The exhibits and visuals are excellent to illustrate the points that you're trying to make. I have one question with regard to slide number 8, dealing with the maximum day demand projection per pressure zone. As I look at that, the first question is, why do we have different pressure zones, some of which are very, very large in area, others are somewhat minute? And trying to answer my question, I can see that several of the smaller ones appear to be old county subdivisions like Maple Hills off of 221, Richland Hills, certainly the Liberty University campus is unto itself, and then there are industrial areas downtown and out along the river that may have their own separate prior water systems that became incorporated into the cities. But why do we have so many different pressure zones?
Short answer is because we're the Hill City.
Okay.
But the pressure zones were created by the elevation of the terrain. So depending on the elevation of the water tanks serving those areas dictates the pressure zone. So like the large area, the 864, that's served by the College Hill water plant.
Sure.
We have like a big 10.5 million gallon tank that Mr. Bendo went in on his first week.
Climbed in the tank.
So anyway, it's dictated by the geographic conditions of the area. There's a lot of small pressure zones because we have pressure reducing valves on those, like on individual neighborhoods or areas, because the pressure would be too great if we didn't have the pressure reducing valve. So it creates a separate pressure zone, even though they may be served by a tank on a larger pressure zone, if that makes sense.
Why would it be that, for example, a small area like, and I say relatively small, like Richland Hills have higher pressure zone than anywhere downtown with the big tanks on College Hill. That's showing 945
Again,
demand
that's-
per day and 864 downtown.
860, that's the way the pressure zones are designated, that's by the elevation of the tank. So the 864 zone is driven by the tank elevation at being full at elevation 864. The 1061 zone, for example, is we have two tanks in that pressure zone that are
Okay.
at elevation 1061. They're providing service to that pressure zone.
And that's why the Liberty University campus is 1312, because the tank is up on top of Candler's Mountain.
That's correct.
All right. Very good.
Yep.
Thank you for those three.
Councilmember Walden?
Again, thank you for the presentation information. Question, I noticed that, of course, all of the red is, the 100-year Hope is in Ward 2, which is our older district. So that is, of course, concerning. Is this an agenda item for our first cities? There's something we're working on to collaborate with that project?
Virginia First Cities?
Yes.
I know that as part of our legislative package and the infrastructure that's coming down from the federal government, we're working with a firm out of DC to try to obviously target the areas that most need to begin with, but also leverage whatever the definitions of the resources that they provide is, and Tim is fantastic at that and proving that. So to answer your question, don't know if it's in the Virginia First Cities immediately, but I know that it's in Lynchburg's legislative package.
All right, thank you. As I was probably concerned from some of the other older cities, like Lynchburg, an agenda item. And I appreciate that. I don't know, every time you come, it's just sometimes overwhelming. And when you finish, I just feel kind of washed out. But it's just so much. But again, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Are there any other comments or questions for Tim? Well, Tim, thank you very much. And this,
Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
oh, yeah. Thank you. We're going to do the business item briefings. First item is Manassas Street Rural right-of-way vacation. This item will appear before council on October 12th. Public hearing for council action. Ms. Bergenthauer.
All right, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, the Poindexter and Manassas Street right-of-way vacations are listed separately on the agenda, but are both proposed as part of the Towns at Locust Thicket subdivision, which will create approximately 132 single-family lots and 2 new streets. The vacations will be brought before you as public hearing items at the October 12th meeting. Both are unopened, unimproved wooded land and will not have impact on vehicle or pedestrian traffic if vacated.
I'm sorry. Councilmember Farley.
Forgive my ignorance, have we considered this area for the development, or is this going to be rezoned, or the whole project? Because I realize this right-of-way is associated with the project.
Yeah, the subdivision is currently under review, but it can't be approved until this part is taken care of. So it's still in process right now.
Okay.
City council.
Yeah, city council won't be involved with the subdivision portion of the process. That's not a public hearing item where it doesn't need a vote. It's by right.
All right, that's what I was looking for, was it by right or not, so thank you, I appreciate it.
So is it an R1 property?
Yes, I believe
So
so.
it's R1, and you said there's going to be 134 single-family homes?
132 single-family lots.
Does this go to PDC normally?
Normally, it does go to PDC, but PDC was canceled due to lack of items, so we're here for a briefing instead.
And you said the second B was just like this, same thing?
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Do you want to add anything pertaining to the Poindexter?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing those on October 12th. Thank you. Next item, FY 2021 fourth quarter and FY 2022 first quarter adjustments. This item will appear before council this evening, September 28th, in our general business for council action. Reed Lantham.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. So you have here before you both the fourth quarter adjustments as well as the first quarter adjustments. We're going to be bringing these before you tonight again for your votes. The fourth quarter adjustments, basically for us to finalize a few FY21 year-end items. The first quarter adjustments or carry forwards are to amend the FY22 budget, allowing us and allowing some departments to fund some initiatives that are not currently in the budget. So these lists that you guys, that everybody has in front of them, outline all of the details of these adjustments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about either the first quarter or the fourth quarter adjustments.
Councilmember Feraldi.
Yes.
Yes. My first question, you mentioned these are going to positions specifically, or no?
No, I said that the first quarter adjustments will allow some departments that are, have them approved to do some initiatives that maybe weren't in the.
Initiatives, thank you.
Initiatives.
Thank
Sorry.
you, I appreciate it. No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Helgeson?
I guess this is, what's it, so that's about $1.8 million of new. So is it money coming out of their budget to transfer, spending it differently, or is it new revenue or new expenditures?
Most of the first quarter adjustments, the biggest part of it is the CARES money that we swapped and flopped with the payroll, covering payroll or the public safety expenses. So we're using that for projects. The projects that we were using it for or want to use it for could not be completed in time due to all the CARES restrictions. So because we swapped the money to cover payroll, public safety expenses, we now have this budget money that's following the fund balance that will carry forward so that we can continue these projects throughout, next year. That's the bulk of the first quarter adjustments.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're now at roll call. Councilmember Nelson.
No items.
Councilmember Tweedy.
No items.
Councilmember Helgeson.
No items.
No items. Okay, Councilmember Feraldi.
Very briefly, just wanted to send a reminder out to the community for today is the National Voter Registration Day. I want to encourage everyone to make sure they're registered for this election in November. I do want to commend I see our chief somewhere, Lynchburg Fire Department for their mutual aid efforts over in Campbell County off of Greenview. There was a pretty substantial mattress fire there, mattress store, and just want to commend them and the rest of the region for working together and addressing that. And then just generally, I would appreciate some insights. Doesn't have to be now. It could be written or a work session. Whatever staff seems is best. We seem to continually be running into delays on Main Street, and I would like to know, what those are, why those have come up, and we're ensuring that this December will be the final pushback on that. So that way Main Street can be open come January 1. So those would be my items. Thank you.
Councilmember Weiler.
Yes, again, just real briefly, I'd like to commend that about 6 physicians came to the Jubilee Center to communicate with Gen Z about getting the vaccine and answering questions about COVID. So I appreciate the health community coming together to make sure getting rid of any misconception about the vaccine or just about COVID itself. So I appreciate the physicians taking time out of their busy schedule coming to do that. And also on Saturday, October the 2nd at 10 a.m., Diamond Hill Baptist Church is having a job fair, and a lot of persons may be looking for employment. So Diamond Hill is having a job fair on this Saturday, right on Gray Street, October 2nd from 10 to 2. And also Frito-Lay is having a job fair as well on October 2nd from 9 to 2. So a lot of persons are hiring. So I appreciate the information coming up to us.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think first, congratulations to Ms. Jackson on her appointment. Very exciting. I also wanted just to commend Parks and Rec for the completion of the Yoder Center and Fairview Heights Center rehabilitations. Are really beautiful spaces, and this caps a number of neighborhood centers that have been that have been redone. I also want to just note and congratulate the organizers of this year's very successful Virginia 10 miler and to the city team that ran the 10 miler and the 4 miler. And then on October 1st, for folks, just knowing that the Art Alley, which is organized by the Downtown Lynchburg Association, is opening, which is very exciting. It is on 11th Street between Commerce and Bluff Walk. So folks should go down and see it and take lots of cool pictures and post them on Instagram.
It's pretty amazing.
It is very amazing.
So I have a couple announcements. Excuse me. On Saturday, October 9th from 8 a.m. until noon, the City of Lynchburg's Public Works Department will conduct household hazardous waste and electronic recycling collection at the Concord Turnpike Convenience Center, 2525 Concord Turnpike. This is a free service for the City of Lynchburg, Campbell, and Amherst County residents. Residents are asked to adhere to the following guidelines. You must wear a mask. Residents must present a valid photo ID. Place small items in non-returnable containers and place in the rearmost compartment of your vehicle. Remain in your vehicle, and a Public Works employee or contractor will remove the items from your vehicle. For more information and a list of acceptable and non-acceptable items, visit www.lynchburgva.gov HHW or call Citizens First Information Center at 856-CITY-2489. A few announcements from Parks and Rec. The Yoder Center will celebrate its CDBG-funded interior renovation with an open house on Friday, October 1st from 10 to 6. Drop by the Jackson Street location and check out the new kitchen and recreation areas. Annual Glow Ride is Friday, October 1st at Riverside Park. Decorate your bike and join the fun at 7 p.m. Prizes will be awarded and food trucks will be on site. The inaugural Riverfront skate contest is Saturday, October 9th from 3 to 7. There will be a DJ on site and prizes will be awarded. And finally, this past weekend, our city played host to the 47th running of the Moore and Giles Virginia 10 miler. Participants from 30 states and 2 countries lined up at the start line for the 10 miler and the 4 miler events. More than 2,000 runners, walkers saw our city at its best, brisk, sunny, and smiling. And now they will tell their friends and family about their top-notch experience here. Congratulations and thank you to everyone involved. But quickly, one of the runners is seated with us here on the dais tonight. Well done, Alicia. And I also know that we will hear from another runner this evening. Well done, Margette. And actually, there were 55 city employees that ran the race, so congratulations to everyone. And just a brief, I know I sound like a broken record, but just a brief record for our citizens to get vaccinated if you are not vaccinated, and to do all that you can do to help mitigate this virus so all of us can return to a normal life. Do it for those you love, for those who love you, and for your community. Thank you. We are now recessed until 7:30 for our council meeting.